All right, we'll make a start. My name's Kerry Campbell. I'm an independent curator, and I was the artistic director at Mansions of the Future. And welcome to the Innovation and Engagement Conference. This is the first session in day 2. Welcome or welcome back if you were here with us yesterday. We had an amazing day yesterday and some really just kind of meaty and generous conversations, which I'll touch upon in a minute. My pronouns are she and her, and just for the purposes of visual impairment access, I am a white woman with brunette hair. I tried to go blonde at the bottom, but it didn't quite work. Kind of brunette hair, and I'm in my attic room, which looks a little bit dark at the moment, wearing a white top. So the Innovation and Engagement Conference is a conference which has been developed by myself alongside Caris, who you can see on your screen this morning, freelance producer and former colleague at Mansions of the Future, and Amara Spence, who will give us a wave, Amara. You can see this morning too, and Amara is the co-founder and director of Maya, a social justice organisation in Birmingham. The Innovation and Engagement Conference, just to give you a little bit of an overview, is it's pitched to organisations in the first instance, and we're committed to kind of nurturing cross-organisational learning, cross-organisational and cross-sector. It's a space where we're hoping to kind of profile and celebrate radically inclusive and social practices, celebrate initiatives which are developed and delivered for and with kind of local constituents. We're thinking about new economies, the sustainability of this work, and also kind of many of the challenges. And within this programme, you'll hear perspectives from the arts and cultural sector, but also crucially, the kind of policy, charity and community sectors which have been delivering this work in extraordinary ways for a very, very long time. Just a huge thank you to partners without who this kind of conference wouldn't be possible. This conference is the final gesture in the legacy agenda of Mansions of the Future, and that project and this event is supported by Arts Council England. We're also indebted to Lincoln Centre for Culture and Creativity at the University of Lincoln. Maya, spelt M-A-I-A, who I mentioned already, and Commonwealth, an economic think tank. And we've done our best to write a lot of those partners into the programme, so you can contextualize their work and their contribution and why it kind of aligns with the themes of this programme. This morning, just to do a few introductions, we've got Fergus. He's got his screen off at the moment, but he is helping us with a little bit of tech support. So if you're having any technical issues, or if there's something you've noticed that maybe us as hosts haven't noticed, something that you're struggling with, or something we've mentioned which isn't quite working, the sound on a video or something like that, please just pop it in the chat and Fergus will help troubleshoot that. We've also got Becky here, who's our visual scribe. Give us a wave, Becky. She's creating these beautiful illustrations for each talk, actually, which is a huge ask, a real tall order. And she's kind of retrospectively working on these illustrations. So what you can see there is an essence of the architectures of change discussion we had yesterday. And she'll be taking notes from each talk and creating these beautiful kind of posters. And we will be capturing those, archiving them and distributing them to all of you after the event, as well as putting them online. So thank you so much, Becky. We're also joined by Claire and Jenny, who are offering BSL support this morning and throughout the conference. If you are hard of hearing or require that support, I think Fergus is putting this in the chat too, please just use the 3 dots on their image to pin their screen to yours, so they kind of stay there. And Jenny and Claire are swapping every 20 minutes between them. Let me just touch on yesterday. Actually, I felt like it might be useful just to open this session with some takeaways from the events yesterday. So we opened with a panel called On the Front Lines. Then we hosted Architectures of Change, while Amara hosted that. And then we had a little evening event which celebrated organizations working in really forward-thinking ways with young people and kind of profiling young people as kind of intrinsic to social justice movements. I just wrote down a few quotes from yesterday, which I thought it would be nice to share to kick off the session. There was so many, there was so much to take away, but just a few bits that really stuck out to me. Charlie Gregory of the White House talked about how do we effectively safeguard ourselves. She mentioned that we're not all trained social workers, which I thought, was a really important point when we think about the work that we're trying to do and how we incorporate signposting into that and acknowledge our kind of limitations and protecting ourselves. Andre Anderson, from Headmaster of Freedom and Balance, was talking about making something from nothing within the kind of confines of the resources that you have. There were questions about what can you do if you don't have access to a space, and he had some really brilliant suggestions for little initiatives that are kind of equally profound, with working just within the limitations of what's around you. All of these talks will be available online post the event, so we'll definitely let you know when those resources are uploaded. This one really stuck with me. Glenn Jenkins, activist and founder of Exodus Collective and leader of Marsh Farm Outreach Project in Luton, talked about poor people being historically schooled to wait for the whistle in terms of kind of community organizing. He referenced Paulo Freire and talked about the importance of class confidence in helping people from disenfranchised backgrounds to understand and overcome class confidence and learn how to kind of blow that whistle, be the leaders of change. And then just something from yesterday evening's talk. Uella from Rising Arts Agency in Bristol talked about hoping to change the narrative about young people being leaders in the future. She said that young people don't need to be leaders in the future. They need to be recognized as being able to be leaders now. Young people have the knowledge and the insight to be leaders today. So how do we kind of prop them up? So just some really beautiful moments from yesterday that I wanted to share with you. And thanks for everybody who could make it. And welcome to everybody who's able to join the conversation today. Caris, did you think I missed anything there with the housekeeping, the kind of technical stuff before I introduce the speakers?
I think you covered everything. Just to mention that if you want to just stay connected throughout in the chat and drop your thoughts and opinions and comments in the chat, please feel free to do so. And if any questions come to mind throughout, if you just want to drop your questions in the Q&A section, and Kerry will address these at the end after the main talk.
Thank you, Caris, you're the best. So this morning, I'm joined by Vicky Sterz, Head of Learning and Civic Engagement at the Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art, and Sarah Monroe, Director at the Baltic. I actually have the privilege of being on the boards at Baltic, and I feel like I've kind of begun to know the organisation a lot more intimately over the last year or so. And when Caris and Amara and I were thinking about this conference, it felt really difficult to place the work of Baltic within one of the themes that we kind of deconstructed the provocation down to. And that's not to say that all of the other initiatives and projects that were represented don't operate in a fluid way, kind of addressing these different themes in their work. But I guess we were thinking about the scale of the Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art, just how many staff work there, and historically and today, all the kind of different facets of the work that they do. And we wanted to present this conversation as an event in itself, so that we could really profile this opportunity for you and us to kind of demystify an organisation of that scale. What are the kind of contemporary challenges that a flagship Northern Arts institution is facing? What are the local urgencies that they're trying to tend to? And what are the kind of structural difficulties that they have to grapple with to really do this work? So there's kind of so much to unpick there. And I'm really grateful for Sarah and Vicky joining us this morning. And I hope between us, we have this opportunity to ask them all the questions that you've ever wanted to ask somebody working within an organisation of that size. In their own words, beyond its bricks, Baltic connects and exchanges with communities, individuals and groups exploring creativity, social connections, and a wider understanding of the world. I'm really grateful to be able to hold space for you both this morning. I know that kind of flanked by this extraordinary team, your organisation is super invested in the social and cultural lives of people living in Gateshead, and you're kind of working to understand and react and respond to this contemporary reality. Before I hand over to you guys, so you could kind of share a little bit more about what you do, I might just read your bios if you don't mind. I know it's always slightly stressful, and also there's so much kind of brilliant work that you do that I feel like these bios are just, yeah, they're just the icing on the cake. But let's start with this, and then we can unpack your work a little bit more. In November 2015, Sarah Monroe was appointed as director of Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art, where she has subsequently led a powerful new vision, enhancing the social and civic mission of the organisation around its public value impact, refocusing the ambition to ensure relevance and impact embedded across the organisation from a practice-led context, as well as developing a new approach to and platforms for programme that responds to the expanded practice of artists across events, performance, residencies, associate artists, and research. Vicky Sterz is Head of Learning and Civic Engagement at Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art. She leads the strategic vision for learning programmes that value mutual exchange, playfulness, and care, delivering play-led exhibitions, extensive online learning assets, and civic initiatives that work across Gateshead and the wider North East. Vicky, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'll just encourage attendees, if you have kind of questions that are coming to mind while Vicky and Sarah are sharing the work that you do, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get round to them. But Vicky and Sarah, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, thank you for having us as a starting point. It's lovely to be here. And the intro was lovely. It's funny when somebody reads your biography back to you and you think, oh yeah, sound all right, don't we? So yeah, it's lovely to be here. Sarah, do you think, is it worth kind of, we could say a little bit about Baltic and a little bit of its grounding and sort of the context of where we are? Is that a good place to start?
Great place to start.
Yeah.
And I was going to say it's really lovely to be here. You will have to slightly forgive me if I get a bit slow, or I had 2 hours sleep last night and I am literally with the tip of my fingernails holding on to go on leave for 2 weeks tonight for about the first time really in 18 months. And so we've just got that sense of relief that we may have got our institution through the worst of the pandemic. So I really hope I can still make sense, but I'm delighted to spend my last morning of the last year of hectic work here with you all.
Great. So maybe if I start, so I won't assume that anyone knows anything about Baltic, so I'll start from the very basic, I suppose. We are located in Gateshead. We're on the banks of the River Tyne, and we are the largest contemporary arts organisation in the UK. We have no permanent collection. So we're a producing organisation, and we very much connect artists and audiences through exhibitions, participation, performance, artist development, and community and public programmes and visitor experiences. So we have kind of three key strategic partners, and they're Arts Council England, they're Gateshead Council, and then Northumbria University. And we opened in 2002, so we are 20 next year. Very excited, big birthday. And we've welcomed more than 8 million visitors since opening. So those are those sort of stats that you would throw about a lot pre-pandemic. And pre-pandemic, we'd tell you, you know, we welcomed around 500,000 visitors a year, and a significant proportion of that, around 200,000, were engaged in learning and civic engagement programs. It is entirely different now. It's a very different story, a very different world. So just to kind of say a little bit about 2020, just in kind of headline facts, I suppose. So in the financial year 1920, we opened 7 days a week. At the height of the pandemic, 70 of Baltic's 92 employees were furloughed, and during this financial year 2021, we opened for only 87 days with just under 39,000 people. So a very different vibe for us, a very different understanding of who our audiences are and how we recover from post-2020. So we reopened on the second lockdown on 19th of May, and we now operate a five-day week opening model. And we're predicting a very best case visitor figure of 250,000 people for this financial year. So I just wanted to sort of say a little bit about that, and then maybe, if I may, Sarah, if this is all right with you, maybe say a little bit about Gateshead, if that's okay. Yeah, so I suppose, again, it's really useful to understand the context of the locality that we work in. And this is not exclusive to Gateshead. I'm not saying Gateshead has the highest levels of deprivation in the world or in the UK. It doesn't, but that's a significant thing that we operate within, and it's a significant thing. It's a significant thing that dictates and influences and shapes our practice as an organisation. So Gateshead's constituents live in the 47th most deprived area in England, and that works out at around 62,000 people living in neighbourhoods with deep generational poverty. And you know, we know that these things mean, we know that that means that statistically people are more likely to experience poorer health outcomes, live with life-limiting illnesses or disability, and to feel the burden of austerity and welfare reforms more keenly than their peers in the south of England. And this has a huge impact on everybody, but particularly on children. So we know that 1 in 4 children in Gateshead live in poverty, and in specific estates or wards across the borough, that is significantly higher. And you know, we know, as we do if we're working in this profession, and if you're in that kind of cross-sector profession as well, that living in poverty, particularly for children, they don't have the same opportunities and life chances as their more affluent peers. And again, that's a big thing that drives us. So when we're talking about urgencies, we're talking about how do we level that? How does Baltic, as a civic organisation, as an organisation that's developing things for common purpose, working with people and artists around common purpose, does it address some of these things? How do we look at action that addresses the consequences of poverty? And then how do we find moments where we can change some of those root causes, working with partners? Baltic is not the answer to everything, but we're a cog within that machine, I hope. And I think that's just quite useful to be thinking about in the context of this talk, I think. So I think that context is just really, really useful for understanding how we operate to find relevance. So if this is the context we're in, how do we find relevance within what we do, what we put on, who we are as colleagues, who we are as an organisation, how we work, how we listen, how we share, because that's what's going on in our locality. Sarah, is there anything you want to add to that, or is it thinking about that local context within the international context now, perhaps?
Yeah, it's always great when somebody feeds back to you something you're heavily involved in and you're still listening to it like, wow, do they do all that? It's like they're mad. I suppose one of the things I keep thinking here, and this is probably my tired head, but the word I've held on to here, Kerry, was when you were doing your introduction, it was that word scale. Mm. And what I was just thinking, and really interesting as well, because I think it's the same Charlie Gregory, but you introduced an opening quote from Charlie. Now, I think that's the same Charlie that I met in the first week that I started at Baltic, because she was then running the Newbridge, which was
exactly, yeah,
base. So it was just lovely thinking about that, and so what I suppose I was thinking there around that kind of really clear context there, which is about the kind of the numbers and the approach. But there was something, I suppose, for me about Baltic in terms of that scale that was, I suppose, as I approached it and came into it, it was almost like the ultimate organizational challenge for, and this is taking this back as a kind of personal, but and thinking about those speakers you had yesterday, often who were starting with quite community-focused, grassroots organizational practices. And I started my cultural worker journey, if you like, in Edinburgh, in an arts organization called ArtLink, which has a really rigorous approach, but it's basically an arts and disability organization. And so in effect, I started working and where we worked was in, everybody thinks of Edinburgh as being this quite kind of affluent city, but of course, like every city, it has all sorts of inequity in its distribution of social housing or housing access to areas, etc., etc. And so what I kind of grounded my practice in, if you like, was working with those that were almost on the margins of the margins. It was people with disabilities, with experiencing mental health problems, people with learning difficulties, who were also living in these areas where they had been disadvantaged. And actually, it really was making me think about, and this is maybe because I'm getting a bit old and reflective at the moment, but I was really thinking back to those really founding moments when your practice starts. And the very first piece of project work I did was with two incredible artists who I think still inform what we're doing and what I added into what was already happening within Baltic. But the two artists whose practice I worked with over that first early few years was Frankie Raffles, who would not have described herself as an artist, but bizarrely this year is in the Glasgow International Festival, but would have described herself as a social activist and photographer. She died about 28 years ago. And artist called Brian Jenkins, who was a graduate of Glasgow School of Art, a wheelchair user, disabled practitioner, who had also been in the British Art Show that year. And I remember this kind of real founding of the discourse that we had, the collaborative, that sense of going in and locating that relevance, that sense of where's this where's that almost like that reciprocity of we were going in and working with people. How did we at that stage find ways of sharing those voices and just really seeing how incredible, where that space was created in an equitable way, what an impact could be had. So I suppose the practice that I've always had has been one that has been formed by opposition. I've never felt that what we do, I've never felt that our institutions are neutral. I don't think there is such a thing. So that sense of things founded really early on about equity and social change. Now, I didn't really consider that overtly as a feminist practice, but by the time I came to work at Baltic via artist-led space, I used to run the Collective Gallery in Edinburgh, which was very much about bringing on emerging practitioners, artists, putting artists at the heart of the kinds of changes that we wanted to see happen. And again, at Tramway before I went to Baltic, and the thing, and I'm sorry, this is really rambling, I don't think this answers anything, but the thing I suppose I was really interested in is could an institution of the scale of Baltic actually hold and work and be accountable for those values and put an artistic practice in the heart of what was a really significant, structurally large, hierarchical, quite siloed organization. And I don't know, that just there's something that, and I suppose I wanted that to be, not that everybody wants to necessarily have access to a large institution but the relationship between what you are doing on the ground and the way that you are working is something that can be translatable. It's not, what I'm doing and what you guys are doing is not that far apart. It's quite close together. And I think sometimes to see it enables you to help to what we're trying to say with that. Sometimes these things I'm thinking again about a kind of sense of when I came into this space and was working, how hard it was to find those models and those institutions that you could kind of gain that space from, and how the connectivity around how you build your relationships in your institution are something that it really sits at the heart of how this change works. So I suppose that sense of one of the things in terms of coming into Baltic, and one of the first things that I suppose we really had to do in terms of this was what I'm interested in is redistribution of resources and assets, and doing that in ways that enable that genuinely try and look at ways that becomes a collaborative sort of process rather than something that comes from the top down. And I'm still trying to really understand whether you can do that in this level of scale, and how does that operate. But that sense of being, now to jump to Vicky's question about the relationship to the local, to the international, which is kind of jumping about a bit, but I think for me, what I've always been interested in is that how do you really go deep and into that local? But of course, the relationship to the international for us is you want those, I want world-class projects, work, artists to be available, but of relevance and influenced by the constituents that we're engaging with. So those two things can become very linked. See, I told you I hadn't slept much. I don't know if that's...
No, that's really good, yeah. I think it's...
consciousness.
Like to hear from you how you do see the local, this investment in the local, and your kind of international reputation and expectation as aligning, and you're kind of navigating the deep challenges of what it means to kind of hold yourself account to both of those expectations. I think is really interesting. I don't think a lot of organizations, as flagship and as huge as Baltic, that kind of investment is as clear. Vicky, I wondered if to help us understand what the kind of every day of your commitment to the local looks like, you could kind of expand on your role.
Yeah, so my role is Head of Learning and Civic Engagement, and I kind of head up a team that kind of has two sides. A team that has a side that is visitor experience, and the visitor experience manager, duty manager team, the crew team, which are gallery assistants, the very first line of sort of learning defence in the gallery, the people who are keeping people safe when they come in the building, welcoming them, giving them a hospitable environment, great customer service, talking about contemporary art, talking about artists, talking about the world and the thematics within the shows. And that's that kind of visitor experience side. Our visitor experience should never be where our crew are security guards. And I think this was a big break in Baltic's practice many years ago through a big Paul Hamlin initiative called Learning on the Front Line. And we're kind of still developing how our crew are really embedded within our learning mission and that engagement mission. And then the other side of the team, and it's very holistic, it's knitted together really well, is the sort of producer side. So working with colleagues that have a very specific remit, so working with very specific audiences. So whether that's schools and colleges, whether that's children and young people, or whether that's communities of geography, communities of circumstance, communities of interest. And we work with audiences across the piece, so the general visitor audience, right through in our building to beyond our bricks. And I do really like that term, it rolls off the tongue really nicely. But in spaces and places across the Northeast and predominantly in Gateshead. So we do a lot of work in Gateshead, which was related to that contextual information at the start. And we, a few years ago, sort of on the back of kind of Sarah's vision and Sarah coming into the organisation, we really looked at something called the Baltic Local, as and it's very much an internal way of thinking about something. I suppose we don't really talk about it externally in that way, but it was very much about Baltic's values and Baltic's value as a space. And I think space is really interesting. Sarah mentioned space, and it triggered something in me this year in particular, because I think historically we've always thought of space within Baltic as the very physical space, our building space, new space. And I think over the last 2 years, but particularly this year, that space has become so much more. It's obviously become digital, like so many people, but it's also become almost metaphorical, and how you hold space and create space. And I think there's just something quite interesting in that. And it kind of goes back to that local drive where we were wanting to take Baltic beyond its building and into community spaces to really work with people on very local concerns. And this was very much about Baltic trying to build partnerships and trying to find partnerships, because I think one of the challenges that always exists for an organisation of Baltic scale, and the fact that it turns 20, is there is an institutional memory internally and externally. And I think that there's things where in the past we've done things brilliantly, and we've also done things that haven't been quite right. And so when you're trying to kind of reapproach working with people in a slightly different way, there's a history of trying to repair relationships perhaps, or re-divert relationships, or just think differently about how you might engage together. And Baltic Local was very much about working together with partnerships very, very slowly. So we started this work in sort of 2018, started to go into kind of different wards in Gateshead that we were interested in working with. So we picked wards that were further away from Baltic, so a bit more rural, with kind of demographically less cultural engagement. We picked areas with higher levels of deprivation, particularly for children, and we also picked urban areas as well. So we tried to kind of think about a different spread across our ward, and went into those spaces and did lots and lots of talking, lots and lots of listening, lots of work with gatekeepers and then the people beyond the gatekeepers, and tried to understand what the issues were, what the concerns were, what was going on, what wasn't going on, what people might like to see, and how Baltic could add value to that. This is your party, could we bring a cake kind of thing. So there's something quite interesting about that listening, and it took us in lots and lots of different paths. And lots of ways. We tried lots of things, we tested lots of things, and the idea with Baltic Local is that when we kind of hit upon something that seemed to work for partners, for constituents, for artists, for ourselves and our own hope to understand our own value and our own civicness, that this would be an embedded initiative, an embedded programme that we stuck with, and that we didn't dip in and out, that we kind of said, well, look, we're here, and we, you know, what we do might change, but we're always here. And I think two big things have come out of that, and these kind of form quite a large crux of what we do and what we talk about and how we work with people. And they are Art Lab and Neighbourly. And these are two of our local initiatives. We were actually targeted to do 3, so we're back in the learning stage and the listening stage at the moment, trying to think about what our third one might look like for people. And Art Lab is a piece that takes place in Berkeley, and it works with families. It works with, for, and is programmed by families who would normally access free school meals in school time, or use food banks, or live within the poverty line. Free school meals is not a brilliant yardstick for these things, so there's some work to be done around there, and we've always taken quite a flexible model with that. But Art Lab puts together food provision and creative provision with artists, learning from contemporary art themes and things that are related to Baltic exhibitions, and offers that throughout the holidays. And this has happened since 2019, maybe 2018. I don't know, my dates are mixed. This has happened a long time, and we were originally aiming to work with 25 families. This is what our partners told us. This is what our constituents said. This is where the need is. We now work with 112. And that's very much on the back of the pandemic. And Art Lab has been one of those commitments that has needed more and more work and more partnership and more listening and more understanding to try and work out where we sit within it, and why a contemporary art gallery would be doing this, and what that's got to do with anything. And I think that sort of link between the politics of food, radical ecology, how artists fit within our understanding of the world, and how we also need to recognise that you can't engage with anything creative or imaginative if your basic needs aren't sorted and looked after, is really, really important. And that's very much the crux of Art Lab, and it's a growing programme. We've now extended into 2 wards beyond 1, and we're really looking at how we start to think about taking that beyond the actionable consequence of poverty, beyond giving the kind of food provision, and we take a very different way of doing that. So I want to be really clear here. It's not about getting a soggy cheese sandwich as your sort of your kind of food provision in the holidays. This is about community supermarkets with artist designed recipe cards and ideas and nutritional pieces. It's like a Baltic style HelloFresh kind of opportunity, and it's really improved creativity together, familial bonding, cooking together, and all of the recipes are very much around you can do this if you've got 1 pan and an oven, or you can do this bit in the microwave. So that actually there's loads of different ways of kind of working. And if I just riffle on to the next one, the other Baltic Local is Neighbourly, and this is very, very different again. So we started thinking about one particular ward, and then actually it expanded a lot. And this Neighbourly was particularly looking at the need to support newly arrived communities, refugees, and people that are seeking asylum. To Gateshead, it was particularly looking at the idea that Baltic was not Baltic. Gateshead Council was agreeing to home and rehouse a lot of Syrian refugees. It was the highest the second highest councils numbers across the UK, and we were aware from conversations that there was quite a bit of tension and quite a bit of a lack of opportunity there for people newly arrived, and we were really interested in how contemporary art and artists could think about addressing this. So Neighbourly takes a whole person approach. So we work with people as their faith identity, their parent identity, their identity as a worker or a future employee, who they are, who they might be as an artist, and who they might be as a creative practitioner, and how they might contribute to the world in a way that is beyond being identified as a status or a tick box on a form. So there's lots of different strands of Neighbourly that work together that include things like an open iftar, ESOL conversation sessions, recipe exchanges, skills match work placements that really target a lot of the things that we were hearing from individuals and these communities of circumstance that were very much about, we need language opportunities, we need opportunities to practice spoken language, we need opportunities to build networks, to make friends, to feel at home, and also to develop our skills. You know, so some people haven't been in a settled place for 6 years. They have amazing skills, but they don't have UK-based experience of it, or relevant, you know, they might be a digital practitioner but haven't touched any digital kit for 6 years and need that experience and that access. And that's where Baltic people and skills and platform can come in, and that's going back to what Sarah's talking about with devolving some of that. I'm aware that's a lot of information that I've just sort of thrown out, so maybe if I pause here, and I think that
was brilliant, thank you, Vicky. I think that's really helped us to get this great sense of this really profound work that is kind of deep rooted. I think Amara talked about Adrienne Marie Brown's book yesterday, and that kind of deep-rooted work and the kind of slow work of building relationships and trust before anything else, and meeting basic needs is certainly within that. And thank you so much for kind of helping us pick that apart. Sarah, I guess I feel like what's really inspired me with the work that you do is understanding how you're trying to make these slow and kind of long-term organizational shifts in terms of structure to kind of more closely align with the local work and the work that Vicky's referencing, and your kind of commitment to the ground. How do you, I guess it would be brilliant if you could expand on what I see as kind of radical feminist gestures in these kind of nuanced ways in terms of crew closely aligning with learning and engagement and curatorial and participation. And I wondered if you could talk about the things that you need to do structurally to make this a more holistic care-led kind of organization.
Yeah. One of the things that made me laugh the other day, I was talking to somebody about, and they were saying, you know, have you read what's your academic, what are you drawing on, what's your reading over the last year? And I went, reading, like reading. Who has had any time to read? But I've gardened, I've gone, and I've gone, and so I was just thinking this the other day, in that sort of relationship to the, this is not an academic project. This is not an abstract, conceptual, you know, we've designed this thing and this is how we can discuss it and talk about it and critique it. It's a thing that's being lived and enacted on a daily basis. And I think there's something quite interesting in that. I'm about to have my first sabbatical in 30 years. First ever sabbatical in 30 years. For a month in September, and I'm going to sort of stop, pause, read, try and position this into a kind of more theoretical kind of, you know, that framing and that thinking. But actually this has been forged by digging and planting and, creating that space to kind of really understand. And I thought it was really interesting when, Vicky, you were talking about that sense of the, it being not. One of the things that was really pushed a lot when I arrived at Baltic was that Baltic's not a building, and I used to jokingly call it's an ideology. We're a way of working, we're a set of practices, we're a set of research interests, we're a set of values about how we collaborate. And this notion, I think the very start of that, what is the institutional change required for the work that Vicky and her team are able to do, because that work, it can sit it can sit as a bolt on to the edge of an institution, and it can have absolutely no sense of the feedback into the core of the organization and where it would sit and change its kind of processes, its policies, its practices. So that, for me, those things have had to be utterly embedded. And so one device was that sense of going and seeing, and actually it was quite early on in my role at Baltic. Vicky got her role as head of learning and civic engagement, and it was a really exciting moment to be able. She had worked in the education department before, but when our previous head of learning left, it was a really great moment to really kind of refocus that beyond what had been some fantastic, like really, really great practice, that sense of where the crew were positioned within the learning, but it still it followed that sort of slightly more traditional, the learning teams are there, the women's work, in effect, that practice from the community, from the activism, from those different ways of understanding that pedagogy and that learning practice, tended to be seen by the hierarchy of value in the organization as the reproductive value. So great, we've got a fantastic exhibition on. The learning team can bring the schools in, they can bring the communities in, they can in effect bring that audience for us, because we've got this thing. Now that's really nice. There's lots more. There was some really great practice going on, but that sort of, for me, was this immediate starting point, was how do we take this out of being something that fulfills an additional function to the presentation of exhibition making and things on walls, and how does it become embedded into the way that we work? And so the first instigation was, very clunky chief exec type stuff, Baltic locals, be local, how do we build those, and of course, that was one of the first big, quite, significant, I suppose, institutional shifts that they were then able to, and then of course they crafted into this far more beautiful thing, and with this real integrity. And then I suppose the second thing that became a real institutional intervention, if you like, was to try and create, it was quite challenging in a large institution. It's quite challenging. We've got two big departments, a kind of curatorial department and a learning department. And again, with Vicky and Irene, who's my head of curatorial practice now, we're all about the weave. We're all about putting those things together. But actually, sometimes you need to kind of create and force a space for that within the organizational's practice to develop. So one of the first things I did was kind of come up with this, and it sounds ridiculous, it didn't have a logo, it didn't have a budget, and it didn't have a little door that you knocked on, but I rather, maybe ridiculously, but called it the Centre for Public Practice. And it was an invisible centre that the learning and curatorial teams came together. When they came together in this space, we weren't in our functional unit. We were in this space where we could start to really try and think and collaborate on projects from the outset. But of course, what that really then starts to make you think about is where that value resides. Where does that resource reflected in the institution? The hierarchy, tended to be that a lot of people working. I mean, traditionally, I think I get really interested in this because I do think the sort of feminist work within the institution resides within the learning. It resides within that kind of educational and sharing, and more than it has really come from the curatorial, where there's a different set of knowledges and a different set of value systems. So sort of the big challenge at the moment is weaving those different things together to try and create a little bit more equity across the piece. But I don't know if that starts to, and in effect, the final thing that's happening, or not the final in any way, we've got a 10-year plan we're working on at the moment. and holding ourselves accountable for what that change will look like over this next period of time. But I think one of the things that has been quite interesting about the way we have started to shift and weave those different systems and ways of connecting internally has been one of the things that I've been most kind of probably proud of over the last year and a half has been the speed at which we've been able to be responsive, because we have this really tight flow between feedback loops from our communities, feedback loops from our artists, straight up and into our board of trustees via our strategic senior team. So there's something about, I think, that shift over the last, I mean, we've been doing this work now, Vicky, haven't we, for 4 years, quite solidly and quite focused. And that in itself, I think, has become something that so there's a kind of resilience, I think, within a lot of our organisation about those relationships that feel that there's trust and robustness. And I think some of that has come through these shiftings of the way that we've been working. But it was the thing for me that's, and this is where I was sort of going with that garden thing. It's like this kind of, and it's not about an intuition in a straightforward way, but I didn't come in and go, here's the manifesto of how you run a feminist institution. But I think 5 years on, we've slightly, if not removed, we've certainly neutered the patriarchy.
More nuance, isn't it? And it takes time. That's fascinating. I'm conscious of time, Sarah and Vicky, but I think it would be, just before I kind of feel to some of the great questions and comments we've got coming in, I think it'd be really nice if you could touch on the future of Baltic, Sarah. Maybe just share the intentions for the organisation around that new post that was kind of tendered out recently, when you think about the structure and the organisation.
This is probably why I'm so exhausted, because I feel like I'm going to get out. We had a deputy director that left, so we've just been, for the last year, we've been, me and with my senior team have been really kind of stretching very, very wide, but we decided to use the opportunity to really rethink that sort of traditional chief operating officer, financial manager type post. And one of the things that was really interesting for me is we'd really started this kind of journey around shifting with that value lay, devolving that power down into our teams more, building their confidence and making sure they were, but around through, I was talking about that model of CPP and bringing our teams together. And in effect, I suppose, what we've done with the next bit of that vision going forward is almost going, actually, how does finance, facilities management, HR, how do those sides of the institutions, which are often seen as that's not really the sexy work. People don't sort of rush to take on those jobs the way they would a head of learning or a head of curatorial. But what we were interested in is saying, actually, what does that, if you rethink that traditional functional management type approach to what an organization's support systems are seen to be, and you really rethink them, how do you reshape that role? And so I quite like investing to invent job descriptions or job role titles. People do laugh at me in the organization for it, but the last 2 jobs that I created was a governance and ethics post, and then my deputy director, or former chief operating type officer role, we have reimagined as a director of enterprise and public value. And this has really come from me now trying to shift the income generation, the way that we ensure our sustainability financially, as much as anything else, is as much aligned to the values that we hold as an institution. And it's an incredibly challenging moment just now for organizations in terms of finances, in terms of income. And what we are really trying to do is, there's no utterly clean money, I'm not that naive, but actually, can we try and create a model where our income is utterly aligned to our mission, and not something where we state a value of just transition, environmentalism, of equity, of fair pay, and then progress a series of corporate events with fancy sports cars out the front of the venue because we need the money. How do we hold that space? How do we how do we enable ourselves to say no to sometimes and say, actually, the price of that money is not what we want to do? And how do we start to really think about that income generation back into the value that we create for our communities? So it was a kind of, so this part of the piece is to really look through our environmental. We're trying to take quite a bold approach to a just transition and hold it not carbon offsetting, but actually really looking at what does that mean to reduce your supply chain, your procurement, your, so that stuff that's the less exciting stuff, but actually putting that in and thinking about how we use that and build partnerships to really deliver big impact. So that work, and that's that scale thing, Kerry, that you talked about at the start. What can we do with the scale of our institution that you can't do in a smaller, because you can't get that level of impact? And I think that's the bit that we're at just now, and beginning to really try and understand where maybe traditionally a lot of value that has been put into the region and in via Baltic has often been extracted back out again. And I'm really interested in saying, how do we ensure that value remains and resides into the Northeast? How do we build this into a circular economy? How do we start to really take those kinds of, sorry, I could talk on for hours. I want to shut up now and see if there's any questions.
I think we could listen for hours as well. I think, thank you. It's so honest of you to kind of reference your income streams, and absolutely, like, there isn't this kind of clean whitewash money, but it's really useful for you to speak about your intentions for the back of house and the kind of nuts and bolts of the organization aligning with that kind of shiny presentation stuff that's on the ground, right down to the contracts of cleaning staff. And I think that transparency and that commitment to unpicking the ethics of the organization right down to that is really admirable. So thank you for that. Really nice comments in the chat. Claire Cumberledge, who was the founder of Mansions of the Future, just said, "This is fascinating. I'm so interested in the history of feminist-led practice and how that can now move from the outside into the heart of the institution," which is nice. Amara says, "Congratulations on your sabbatical." She's about to take one too, and she knows how liberating it must feel to be on the cusp of something like that after such a long time dedicated to that work. So we'll all have a drink with you and Vicky this evening. Let me just pick up a couple of questions in the chat. Lots here. Vicky, maybe you could pick up on this one for us. It's from Marcus Hargis, and he says it's really brilliant to hear more about Baltic as one of the open submission exhibitors. Can I just say how significantly moved I am to have been selected? This was true inclusion. Thank you. His question is, how do you go about integrating communities, for instance, geographical or BME, with non-BME, or abled with disabled, or deprived with non-deprived? Sorry, I don't know if I read that in the best way. But yeah, about integrating different fractions of the communities, particularly underrepresented. Yeah. Vicky, I don't know if you wanted to pick up on that one.
Yeah, very happy to. Thank you, Marcus. Congratulations on being part of Open Submission. Lovely to have your work with us. Yeah, really interesting question. And I suppose maybe if I could pick a couple of examples that might be helpful. So I think one of the sort of starting points of this, because I think particularly the Neighbourly programme, because it focuses on refugees and people seeking asylum, there is sometimes a criticism levelled at organisations. Well, what about everybody else? Kind of thing, and also what is that? I'm not saying that's what you're saying, Marcus, at all. But what is the integration offer, and how are people not then separated into kind of different categories, and how does that kind of work together? And I think the Open Iftar was our first sort of attempt to kind of join that together. Iftar translates as breaking the fast, and it's a celebratory event in the Muslim calendar, and it was really interesting because this became really important to our constituents, that Baltic host an Open Iftar, and that the Iftar was open to people of all faiths and no faith as well, and that we come together in this space, and that we eat, we break fast together, we listen to speakers, and we celebrate being there. And I think it was a really interesting event because it was basically, there was over 250 people there back in pre-pandemic days, obviously. And it was a sort of 50-50 split between people who'd come because they were just super curious and had never come across anything like this and wanted a free meal, and other people who really understood the religious significance of this, and then people in between. And the conversations and the just understandings that came out of that were really, really interesting and exciting. And iftar is something that we keep trying to redo and are looking again at 2022, kind of post-pandemic. But what it also sort of started for us was a kind of desire to create more space where people can be together and discuss kind of vaguely contentious issues, perhaps, and kind of have conversations that might be particularly difficult. And I think Front Room has become a really interesting space for that. Front Room is a new initiative for Baltic. It's come out of the pandemic as a sort of practical response and almost a financial response as well. Front Room is, if you've ever visited Baltic, now where Baltic Kitchen was, which was a commercial space run by our hospitality partner. And due to all the changes in hospitality, they've had to give up that space. They had 3 spaces in Baltic, they now have 2. And Front Room has become a community space. It's become a community hospitality offer, a space where you can come, get free refreshments, free snacks, meals in the holidays, and take part in kind conversation and safe congregation. It's manned by mental health first aiders, and it also has a new thing for us in the last couple of months. We've put together an inclusion calendar through that, so we're celebrating different national moments. We're currently celebrating Platforming Refugee Week. There's more coming up, and it's basically a space to have conversations, find out more, raise awareness, think about advocacy, join people together, find friendships. That's the vision, and where that works. And I suppose with that, it's also highlighted that to do these things, you have to be safe and welcoming space, and you have to do that for everyone. So we have put together a new visitor charter, made that very public, that includes a hate crime and hate incident policy, and have 12 trained hate crime and hate incident reporting and awareness champions through Northumbria Police. So we're really working hard to kind of understand what our role within the expectation of our visitors can be, and how we can make it as safe space as possible. So I suppose those are some maybe tangible examples of how we've done that with particular communities, Marcus, and I hope it gives an idea of how we've started to think about that.
Thank you, Vicky. Go on, Sarah.
Just very quickly, Marcus, but it's a great question, because one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about, because we do want to change the world, we don't really like it, and we're never allowed to say that's what we want to do, but we do. And one of the things we've been thinking a lot about, particularly as we went into lockdown and a lot of these things became really exaggerated, and then those kind of tensions and that level of aggression, and things seem to be going more and more to the extremes and less, and I'm not talking about the centre ground as a kind of some kind of political middle ground. I'm talking about where people build and meet and create that understanding. And so one of the things for us that has been a kind of quiet defining piece of work that we have been putting a lot of our kind of recovery programs and thinking into has been about actually what is the role in cultural institutions in this kind of fairly emergency situation that we are, with the culture wars and everything that's kind of coming at everybody, is actually how do we build participative democracy? Because that is what's under threat. I mean, really seriously under threat. And what is the role of cultural institutions in bringing those different viewpoints and understandings and building that space in the middle where we might not necessarily agree, but we can actually, and that's where it becomes really important to ensure you do not just go down this kind of, we've got this for this and this for this, because actually it's about that. And actually, how do we also engage in difficult conversations with some of our audiences that might think we're utterly woke when we use certain types of languages, and things like that. So I'm not frightened, I'm kind of like, how do we sort of really tackle? So I suppose there's something in a very broad space around that question that is so important is, you know, I often say in my team, we can't change the world, but we can build the world we want within this framing. And actually, what do we want that to look and feel like? And part of that has got to be about building a tolerance and understanding of different positions, when the dangers of this kind of spiraling lack of listening to one another, I think is dangerous. We need to help to sort of galvanize things back together. But I think to do that, you need to do it from a position of what you want to achieve. And that's where that kind of things like the work we've been doing with the Visual Art Alliance has been quite interesting.
Did you want to touch on that, Sarah?
Yeah, I'll quickly touch on that, and because it kind of came, you know, I think everybody, you know, a lot of projects are born out of a kind of sense of kind of anger at something else or frustration, and I have no problem with people, you know, taking lumps at each other on Twitter. It's absolutely fine if that's how people want to engage, but it's just not how I can engage, and I don't see that it creates a lot of change. And I suppose one of the things that we were very aware of as we went into lockdown, and that huge anxiety and the real disparity of how it impacted, that lack of equity in terms of the impacts were really influenced very differently. And part of my role is I chair the CVAN network, which is a contemporary visual art network. And as we went into that pandemic, it's one of those things, you know, sometimes you go into a pandemic, you realise something's not fit for purpose and you get rid of it, and other things, it's just the making of them. And actually, it was the absolute making of that CVAN network, because we absolutely realised what we had to do and the urgency of what we had to do, and brought two amazing young women who really stepped up their leadership over that period. Paula Orrell brought her in we employed her as the director of the network. And we really started to look at the sense of everything was spiralling, everything was being critical. And I could almost see the sector I'd worked in and committed to for sort of far too many years, probably nearly bloody 30, but sort of splintering, and there was good people who wanted to do stuff, but they didn't know how to do it. And there was this sort of fear, particularly on the back of things like the Black Lives Matter. And so the alliance really came out of, I can't do this, I can't watch this implode on Twitter. How do we help those that want to, or how do we create that space to go, right, we're going to form something, we're going to form an alliance, we're going to bring those disparate visual art networks together. So it was across DAX, AN, CVAN, the Black Curators Forum, Engage, and we wanted to kind of bring those voices together to try and help understand, what do we see the future state, what did it look like, how do we create a kind of manifesto, and then enable, how do we help the sector itself, or those that wanted within the sector, to find a way, a sort of safe way, a focused way of mapping that, getting to that transition. So if we can see what it looks like, how also then do we start to take people on that journey, and use it then also to influence the government, and so it became this kind of very early days, but it is quite an interesting space for where we are finding a way of collectively working out the difficult stuff together, you know, so we can challenge each other in it, but we're trying to do it within a sense of constructive space, but it's got a very clearly identified future state, which it's not neutral. It's defined as anti-capitalist and non-extractivist.
Thank you, Sarah. Amazing. I'm conscious of time. Let me see which questions I'll pick a couple. This one at the bottom is quite interesting. It says there's been a few mentions of accountability and holding an institution to account. How can, and I guess, are cultural organisations such as Baltic accountable to their local communities, rather than to an internal agenda or to external funder requirements? I know that like an internal agenda and external funder requirements are, you know, part of the way an institution operates. So I guess it could be pitched as like, how in addition to those are you or can you be accountable to your audiences?
I'll say something quite short on this one, because this is something I'm thinking about all the time in thinking about this. We've got this kind of more, I called it a pandemic upgraded kind of vision, mission stuff, but the around this public value and where did value reside in our communities, and how do we enable it, and etc. And there's something there for me that's really, I think, the starting point for this, and because people have different understanding, and I kind of almost like the starting point is to understand what it's not. So for me, it's not a way of simply taking what Arts Council or taking what a local authority or tell us we need to do and showing it back to them. You know, it's not just about that piece. It's much more about how do we also have that, how do we also educate the Arts Council? So how does it work back the way as well? How do we influence the funders' understanding of where communities, the value of where communities see the value of the work that we do residing, or the, you know, so there's, I just think there's something that's something I'm beginning to really think quite deeply about at the moment, is how does this not just become a thing that goes, oh, they're doing really well, let's tick the boxes, they've met all their investment principles, but actually how do we do this in a way that is genuinely a learning, you know, a feedback loop both ways. I want to influence funders to understand what they define value as, because, you know, one of the reasons we've got a kind of, you know, the way that the publicly funded art looks like and feels and smells like it does is because it's been a very particular understanding of what that is that's come down the way. And I think it's time to push that and influence that back up. And actually it was quite interesting because I have got a phone call just yesterday from somebody at the Arts Council who wants to talk to us about the new vision around public value, because they think it can illustrate beautifully a dynamic investment principle. So this will be, we're going to get into this territory quite soon, but Vicky might have something much more focused and practical to that answer.
I actually don't have anything more practical, because to me, I think you've hit the nail on the head. You're in, for me, I think our internal agenda is our community agenda. I think we need to make those the same thing, and we need to tell our big partners, this is the agenda that we're working towards. You need us to do this. Well, how does this do that? And actually hold really firm to the values and the ethos and the authenticity, I suppose, of what you believe you're doing and why you believe you're doing it. And I think it's going all the way back to that start of that listening, that constant reciprocal loop, and how you forge those partnerships where people are telling you what their agenda is, and where you then become part of their expectation. So that expectation is there. They are holding you to account because of the relationship that you've built, and that's what you're building into your internal agenda. That is your internal agenda, and that's what you're saying to the funders. This is our agenda. So if you know, this is how we work together, which is kind of maybe scary in some ways, but really exciting in others.
Amazing, thank you, Vicky. I'm just picking up on a question that's come into the chat, and I might have to make this the last one. Let's see. And it's from David Cleary, and he said he's really interested in the Front Room initiative. It sounds amazing, and how a gallery can kind of operate as a public space. One challenge he's facing, and I think we've kind of touched on this in a conversation we've had, Vicky, is trying to justify making a free space which is occupied by a commercial one. So how do you kind of meet those inclusivity desires with the challenges of enterprise, which an organisation at the scale of Balticus faces? And I guess that friction, is that something that you're always grappling with? And how can David's asking, how can he make change without putting the organisation at risk financially, which I guess isn't a simple answer.
This is Dave, I'm with you on this one. This is a constant, you're just constantly going, right, I've got 20 pence there, if I spend it, can we cut it off 20, you know, it's the kind of take it from one to feed it to the other, the classic Robin Hood approach, I think, isn't it? So two things, I suppose. One is, and this is where that, you know, had we not had the pandemic, had our operator not come and given us 24 hours notice to say they were pulling out of one of our most visible, public, beautiful spaces, I would have probably, you know, it'd be really interesting if I had taken this as an abstract idea to my board of trustees in the middle of a pandemic, or not in the middle of a pandemic, and said, I want to take the profit out of that space and I want to do this with it. You know, it would have been interesting. I suspect it would have taken a lot longer. But what was really interesting is obviously, and that is a circumstance thing, you know, the circumstance happened, they pulled out, we had that in place within 3 weeks, really. But what was also happening in parallel to this, which helped, was we were doing this quite deep poverty proofing. So we brought Children Northeast, who have this kind of really great methodology that they've developed coming out of community kind of organising practices and things, working it through schools to poverty proof the school day. And we brought them in really as the first visual, certainly the first visual, the second cultural institution that they'd ever worked with. And so through that sense, that was it, we were able to take the entire organisation, not just from the top, understanding it intellectually or believing it, you know, but right through the organisation, people then understood what that really meant, what that exclusion or needing, you know. And I think so something about that, people understanding that made it much easier to say actually this. So when I was then talking with the trustees who also took part in this poverty proofing training, it was a really simple, people really got behind the fact that that space itself was no longer looked at for its commercial income, it was looked at the social value. So we changed the value metrics. And that was that was something that we report on. That is our mission. That is how we show that we are delivering what we're funded to do. Now, however, I absolutely appreciate if that is your only space in the entire building and you have these income targets, that's, you know, we have other spaces. We have 3 quite large spaces that we can use. So what we've now got going forward, but in a way it still has an impact because it still hits financially the bottom line, and we have to keep the institution open. I've got a lot of jobs to keep, you know, we contribute into the economy, we've got lots of commitments. But I think it is that thing about trying to get your governance structure to not just look at the value through its income, and then you have to, and that's where we had to kind of go, right, I now need to find that income from somewhere else. And actually some of it's come through things like we've got, you know, guys giving us all the free coffee, and we've got this and that. But Vicky, you might want to.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going to pick up, because I suppose it's maybe some practical application, David, is thinking about that support, because I think that's been particularly new for us this year, because all of those business partners, kind of Baltic partners that have invested a smallish lump of money with Baltic pre-pandemic, it was very much around space and how they used Baltic space for their meetings and their conferences and their sort of showcases and that sort of thing. And we've really had to work with business partners to flip that around and kind of say, what about investing in this? This is the public value of this. This is what it does for your organization. And this is the story that you can tell to your investors, to your staff, to your stakeholders on the back of this. And this has been a really, certainly for learning and civic engagement, a really great model. We have businesses on board for a schools project that we wanted to do, but that actually puts money to the bottom line, gives them great value, and really employs artists, does something brilliant in schools. We're also exploring an early years program with a business that we want to do, but we need that support, and we've got business support in front room now. So I'm wondering, on my wonder there for you, David, is there any way of bringing business in there and really speaking to their social responsibility, their stakeholders, their civic mission, because they have them too, and post-pandemic it's even stronger. So if you can find a good match, that might be an opportunity.
Great advice, guys, thank you. Vicky, I've got one final question for you and then we'll wrap up. I'm really interested in your kind of personal journey and your investment in the Baltic. And I wondered if you could share a moment where you felt most proud of something you and your team achieved.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and it's probably there's probably 2. So I think I'm going to go pre-pandemic here. I feel like we've got a new AD, BC kind of vibe going on now.
Someone yesterday called it Pandem, one of the panelists, which I thought was great.
With the Pandem. So I think one of the biggest moments for me with the team was a really big moment for Baltic as well, and it was the very first sort of play intervention takeover exhibition at Baltic, and it was a 3-week takeover of our level 4 space in 2019. And it was working with 2 artists called Esther and Rossi, and this was the first time that learning and play, well, not play, but learning had taken over a gallery space, the level 4 gallery space, the big one. And we were kind of given this opportunity to encourage, with a remit, to bring people into the gallery to explore play, because we'd had the playground project a couple of years earlier. It had been really, really successful, and to really try and bring in a traditionally non-visiting audience. And Pester and Rossi took over that space. I mean, we're just going to put a pin in the environmental issues because we know there's an issue here and we're not going to do it like this again. But basically, it took over that white cube space with vinyl, with electrician's tape, with inflatables. That white cube went from pristine and quiet to noisy and scary and covered in stickers over 3 weeks. There was over 20,000 people visited that space in 3 weeks, and it was incredible. And the team worked so hard, not just to bring that there, to put events on with it, to actually staff it as well, because it needed more staff and we had a very short turnaround. So everybody worked in that space, and to just, at the end of that, to be pulling all that down off the floor and off the walls, and to kind of think, we've achieved this, and it's been a really amazing moment, had been one that had really been at the heart of Baltic and changed the way we looked at spaces, was incredible. We now do a play show every year, and it's now moving into an annual commitment. And that, from that moment, it's just incredible. So I am so proud of the team for making that happen, and for just really digging in, because there was blood, sweat and tears, lots of tears in that, because it was so intense, and it was just brilliant. So I'm really proud of that. And I suppose very quickly put on the back of the pandemic, I remember sitting down with the team just before we kind of broke up and people got furloughed and we moved off in kind of different ways, and kind of said, just in that last week, we need to change everything. It's not going to exist as it was before. We need to do this. We need to respond like this. What can we do for people? And there was this moment where everybody sat on this real sort of shell shock of everything that they planned for months and years was just not going to happen anymore. And then there was this visible sort of click, and it clicked in, and everybody leaned in, and it was like, right, this is how we're going to do that, and this is how we're going to do it. And we did that. We reacted even before the gallery, even before the government closed us down. And I think I'm so proud of that. Yeah, incredible.
Vicky, Sarah, thank you so much. We're so grateful for your insights today, and just how generous you were with kind of helping us get behind the smoke and mirrors of a large scale organisation. And I guess another huge thank you is that the free ticketing option for this conference, the Baltic Bursary option, so that anybody, you know, of any means could attend today and yesterday, is thanks to Baltic's kind of financial contribution and just kind of emotional investment in the conference. So another huge thank you for that to you guys. It's really valuable for us. Claire and Jenny, thank you so much for trying to keep up with us in that one. And Becky, thank you so much for all this commitment, your illustrative commitment to capturing these conversations too. Our next conversation today is at 1:30 till 3, so a nice long lunch break. We wanted to make it quite light, and it's called Democratic by Design. And that's hosted by Josh Gabert-Doyen of Commonwealth. So please join us for that. And then our final event today before the football, but Sarah told me not to stop mentioning that, is called Digital Infrastructures at 3:15 till 4:30. So if you're around for those, we look forward to seeing you then. A final thank you to everyone and everyone who was able to join us or is watching this recording retrospectively.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Kerry, for having us. That was a fantastic.
You're welcome.
My last day before I go off on holiday. Thank you, everybody.
Enjoy a sabbatical, Sarah, from all of us.
That's not till September. This is just 2 weeks with my mother in Orkney.
Enjoy your holiday.
Bye,
guys.
bye.